It is no secret that in the age of EVs, to really maximize on range, you don't bring an SUV to do a sedan's job. That's why, after a year of getting praise for its funky Ioniq 5, Hyundai has taken the electric bits and shoved them in this streamlined shape, the Ioniq 6. The Ioniq 6 is one of our favorite cars to drive this year, but just as is the case with pretty much every EV that we've driven the last 2 years, one question keeps coming up: how does it compare to the Tesla? So, we brought one along. In this case, it's the Model 3, which is the closest equivalent to the Ioniq 6. The Model 3 is the compact sedan EV, and it sets the bar. The question is, can the Ioniq 6 clear it? Let's find out.
We'll get you back to Kyle's electrifying comparison in a second, but before we go any further, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, NLX Way, the company behind the popular Juicebox EV chargers. If you're looking to buy an electric car, you'll absolutely want a reliable and smart level 2 charger like this sleek 40 amp Juicebox unit. It charges at up to 7 times faster than a level 1 charger, adding around 30 miles of range per hour. What's really cool is the easy-to-use NLX Way app that can find you public charging on the go, schedule charging when rates are low, monitor and start or stop charging remotely, and also notifies you when your vehicle is fully charged, saving you time and money. It even operates on voice command using Amazon Alexa.
Hit the link in the description below to learn more and use our exclusive discount code, AutoGuide.com, to get $25 off a new Juicebox home charger.
So before you ask, we rented this particular 2023 Model 3 from Turo. Tesla, rather infamously, doesn't believe in press relations, so this is one of the few ways of covering the car outside of a friend owning one or just buying the thing ourselves. Of course, the reality of editorial scheduling and planning means that you're going to be watching this after the facelifted Model 3 has already dropped. That's okay, because I'd actually argue that this is the more distinctive model, and that's after oodles of them have proliferated across our highways. It's still a clean, uncluttered design with minimal decoration and tidy overhangs. Tesla gets dinged for its quality a lot, but the panels all fit well on this China-built model. I even like the 18-inch Aero wheels. There's always been something a little froggy about the face, at least to me, but hey, Kermit's a beloved character, okay? Model 3 drivers probably disagree with the old frog though, because as it turns out, it's kinda easy going green. Getting into the cabin of the Model 3, it's a airy, spacious place with this glass roof providing noticeably more noggin room than you'll find in the Hyundai. The super low cowl provides an excellent view out ahead, and the corners of the car rise up just a little bit, which gives you a clear idea of where the Model 3's nose ends. I'm not a big fan of these super squishy vegan leather seats. They don't really provide much support, but I will say that the power adjustability makes it easy to find your right setup. That's about the only easy adjustment you'll find in the Model 3 though. Tesla practically invented the tape a tablet to the dashboard approach, and its hyper-minimalist cabin places just about everything in that touchscreen. Want to adjust your side mirrors? Yep, that's in the menu, and then you have to adjust it via the toggles on your steering wheel. What about the steering wheel itself? It's reach or rake. Same situation. Now, admittedly, you're not going to be changing these too often, and even if you do, cloud-based user profiles means that they'll follow you from one Tesla to another, which is pretty handy. But it's still not very intuitive, and it becomes a problem on the move. Also, I couldn't get either side of the wireless charger to work with my iPhone. It's kind of wild that the Ioniq 6 cheats the wind as well as it does, because it's definitely not a nondescript jelly bean of a car. There's a lot going on with the styling, from the creased nose and those active grille shutters down low, the sculpted sides, and that truncated tail. Now that double spoiler butt does give Porsche and Saab vibes, but with a modern twist that I personally really enjoy. It's certainly not a design for everyone, but you can't accuse the Hyundai of being boring. Those pretty 20-inch alloys do look great, but they chop a significant amount off the range. Like, we're talking over 40 miles. So pop the Ioniq 6's door handles, which are also flush like the Tesla's but open the correct way, and the cabin is a huge departure from what you see in the American car. I mean, look at this! Actual physical buttons and textures! I mean, beyond the not entirely convincing wood paneling trim, anyway. Really, the Ioniq 6's cabin is a breath of fresh air. It's warm and it's inviting, and it's still got some funky touches to it, like the inboard window controls or this winged dashboard design, which is designed this way because other markets actually get side view cameras that are placed right here. The Ioniq 6 isn't without its own green credentials either, with materials made from things like recycled plastic bottles and fishing nets. In a surprise move, the door panels aren't as soft as those in the Tesla, but there is a heft and resistance when you poke them. The Hyundai just feels more substantial. It also feels a little tight, at least up front. So the combination of the smaller sunroof, the twin 12.3-inch screens, and the center console make it feel like while there's only a 2-inch difference in headroom on paper, it might be more? But the seats are much more supportive than the ones in the Tesla, and while both cars have heated thrones in both rows, only the Korean model has ventilation up front. The headroom premium continues in the back, so even though the Hyundai is taller, that tapering roofline does mean that anyone approaching around 6 feet might feel the pinch back here. Now that being said, there's a lot more legroom. Similarly, storage is the Hyundai's weak point. You can fit a surprising amount of stuff in the Tesla's wide-mouth trunk with 19.8 cubic feet or 561 liters. The Hyundai's got barely over half that with 11.2 cubic feet or 316 liters. So one important thing to note there is that while the numbers show a huge difference, the actual trunk space is surprisingly similar. The Tesla's main advantage is that it has a huge underfloor storage space, whereas the Hyundai only has a small one, and that usually is filled with the charger and the cord. Both cars also have a frunk, but while the Teslas can fit a pair of camera bags, the Hyundai can fit a pair of cameras. Now, how these two drive is very different, and that's because you're looking at the lowest and highest trims of the Tesla and Hyundai, respectively. Now, Tesla introduced a new LFP battery this year for the Model 3, which improves both range and longevity. In terms of single charge range, you're looking at 272 miles now for this model, which is 438 kilometers in Canada. Tesla also reintroduced the long-range model a few months ago, and that's a better, appropriate competitor for the Ioniq 6 that we have here. Now, by dint of its single-motor setup, the Tesla feels lighter, and that's because it is, by a fair few hundred pounds. Even the dual-motor long-range is trimmer than the hefty Hyundai. So even though the Model 3 is down about 50 horsepower and well over 100 pound-feet of torque, it doesn't feel that much slower in everyday use. In fact, the Tesla is right on the heels of the Hyundai from around 50 miles per hour, or about 80 kilometers an hour. At low speeds, it just can't match that all-wheel drive oomph though, and its throttle response is duller regardless of the posted speed. The Model 3 doesn't really like bumps either. You throw one its way and it loses composure, heaving along all three axes. There's a lot of noise from the rear suspension, and also from some trim pieces, and at speeds that are a lot higher, you get a lot of wind noise from these frameless windows. Basically, it just widens the perceived quality gap between these two cars. On this wavy bit of tarmac, which the Ioniq 6 handled pretty darn well, I have to slow down in the Model 3, otherwise it just gets uncomfortable. So it might sound like I'm being harsh on the Model 3 driving experience, but actually there are upsides. For starters, this small diameter steering wheel has a nice tight 2 turns lock to lock, which makes the Model 3 feel pretty agile. More than that, it has a good amount of resistance when you set it to the sport steering setting. In fact, that's one of my favorite parts of the Model 3, is that when you set the accelerator or the brakes or the steering to your desired mode, it stays that way. I don't have to worry about switching every time I go into neutral. As automakers are wont to do, Hyundai sent us the absolute top trim to test here. So in the US, that is the Ioniq 6 Limited all-wheel drive. Here, in Canada, it is the Ioniq 6 Preferred all-wheel drive long-range with Ultimate package. Whatever you want to call it, the Ioniq 6 is great to drive. So it's a dense little nugget at around 4,600 pounds or slightly less than 2,100 kilos. But from behind the wheel, the Ioniq 6 only feels about a passenger's worth heavier than the Tesla. There's a well-damped maturity here that's really lacking in the American car. Going for the dual motor setup in the Ioniq 6 automatically puts buyers in the larger 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack model, and that gives you a combined horsepower of 320 with 446 pound-feet of torque. Now that latter figure is the important one here because it really defines the Ioniq 6 driving experience. Torque is basically instant, and throttle response is really strong. So as an example, that. It's really, really quick, and the accelerator response is noticeably sharper than the Teslas, and that's even in the regular drive mode. So I could go to sport mode and even improve that. The suspension tuning is another way where the Ioniq 6 kind of reminds me of more European machinery. Hyundai's engineers have found a great balance between everyday comfort and sure-footed athleticism here. On the wavy tarmac in our local park, the Ioniq 6 handles the bumps way better than the Tesla, not feeling like a boat lost at sea. Now, if you go out of the city and into more fun ribbons of tarmac, it's also a blast there. It's very well composed, and it stays reasonably flat with little body roll. You also have different drive modes, and there's a noticeable difference in the characteristics between them. And in addition to that, Hyundai will offer you the custom drive mode setting where you can tailor the stuff to your particular needs, including a rear drive mode, if you feel so inclined. There's also less noise overall too, both from the suspension and just generally from the road and wind. One thing I don't love about the Ioniq 6 drive experience is this. That beep is to let you know that iPedal is active, which is the highest level of regenerative braking, and it allows for one-pedal driving. You use it through the steering wheel mounted paddles. All good, right? Yes, except that every single time you park or go into neutral or reverse, it resets to one level below that, and I just want it to stay on all the time. So Teslas come with a ton of tech, and obviously the Model 3 does not buck that trend. It comes with a large 15-inch touchscreen, which can be a little overwhelming at first, but I find only a little bit of time makes it a pretty comfortable experience. So navigation is included as standard on every Model 3, and it's a pretty good one because not only are the maps very high res, it has excellent voice recognition, which makes calling out directions simple. Now, other features like satellite imaged maps or live traffic feeds or video streaming, which includes the Sentry Mode security feature, are free for the first month with the premium subscription, but then you have to pay after that. The Joe mode reduces audio notifications, similar to the Ioniq 6's quiet mode. While I prefer an actual 360-degree camera feed like the Hyundai's to the Tesla's visualizer, I do appreciate the heat map proximity warnings, including the rough distances to nearby objects. The standard autopilot does adaptive cruise control pretty solidly. There's a boatload of tech in the Ioniq 6, and most of it is standard across the board. Things like automated emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, and lane assists are welcome, but par for the course. I prefer Hyundai's more natural-feeling blind view monitor to the Tesla's odd camera angles, and its head-up display is a big win. The latter offers augmented reality navigation, which is nice, but the Hyundai native nav setup is unnecessarily cumbersome. The voice controls also leave something to be desired. While Tesla buyers can pay extra for things like Summon, higher-spec Hyundais offer the parking assist via the fob. It's only forward and backward, though. The Model 3 can charge up to 250 kilowatts on the supercharger network. With a home setup, the smaller battery in this model allows it to top up in less time than the Ioniq 6. Every Ioniq 6 runs on the eGMP platform, capable of charging up to 235 kilowatts at DC fast chargers. That allows ultra-quick charging from 10 to 80% in under 20 minutes. Level 2 charging at home is a little under 7 hours with the bigger battery pack. I can't forget to mention its V2L capabilities either, allowing owners to plug accessories into the Ioniq 6 and charge them. Tesla asks for $41,630 US for the base Model 3, or $56,980 Canadian. Well, at least this week anyway. pricing has fluctuated a lot in 2023. Now that's a wicked deal in America and an alright one in Canada, where the Ioniq 6 is just $56 cheaper to start. Now beyond paint and wheels, the only major cost options are the enhanced autopilot package for $6,000 or 7,800 Canadian, adding a more robust adaptive cruise control, auto parking, and the summon feature. Tesla's misleadingly named full self-driving capability continues for a pricey 12 or 16 grand depending on market. Now adding the second motor brings more power, more range, which is now up to 333 miles or 534 kilometers, and of course, more money. You're looking at 7 grand US or an even $10,000 Canadian. So speccing the 19-inch wheels does shed a little bit of range off the Model 3 long range. You're still looking at a little bit more range though than the equivalent 18-inch all-wheel drive option from the Ioniq 6. Now if you want even more power, the performance model is still available. Pricing kicks off at $42,715 in the US, including destination. Now that will get you the smaller batteried rear drive Ioniq 6, which gets pretty close to the Tesla in terms of range at 240 miles or 386 kilometers. But it does so with an Elantra-like 149 horsepower. If you spend a few extra grand, you'll get the larger battery pack and more power, which is now 225 horsepower, and that's where the Canadian range kicks off at $56,924, also including destination. There you'll find up to 361 miles of range, which is 581 kilometers, and it beats the rear drive Tesla. In fact, it also beats the long-range Tesla. So going for all-wheel drive and the 18-inch wheels knocks the range down to 316 miles or 509 kilometers, which of course is slightly less than the all-wheel drive long range. Then, if you go into this model, which has the fancy pants 20-inch wheels, you lose even more range, resulting in 270 miles or 435 kilometers. Now look, it can be hard to separate Tesla the brand from the antics of its man in charge. And yeah, over the years, its competitors have slowly chipped away at its previous advantages, namely range and charging speed. But the Model 3 remains the brand's best offering, even in base form. It's spacious, it's easy to drive, and it comes with a lot of standard kit. And there's the supercharger network, which is so good other automakers are signing up to join it. This is the default choice for a reason, and pair that with price reductions and the general availability, and it's really hard to argue with. But it's also hard to argue against the appeal of the Ioniq 6. The Tesla's ubiquity is its biggest drawback, whereas the Hyundai just feels special. It's definitely the one that I'd rather drive, and it's also the one that I would just rather spend time in, even though I really wish that it had the Ioniq 5's glass roof. But at the end of the day, it's just hard to beat a Model 3.
Thanks again to our sponsor, NLX Way. Click the link in the description below to learn more.